What do you mean he can't remember me? What about the house? What about the accounts? Everything we planned together. Those were the first words out of Viveka's mouth when the doctor called. Not is he okay? Not I'm on my way. Not even oh God. Just, what about everything? And somewhere in that hospital room in Toronto, Ezra Mensah Cole lay in a bed he didn't recognize, staring at a ceiling he couldn't place, trying to remember the name of the woman he was supposed to marry in 6 weeks. He couldn't. Before we get into what happened next, let me take you back to the beginning, because this story, like all the ones that matter, didn't start with a tragedy. It started with a choice. Actually, it started with 2 women, and 1 man who couldn't yet tell the difference between someone who loved him and someone who loved what he had. Ezra Mensah Cole was 39 years old when the accident happened. He was the kind of man you'd notice without meaning to, not because he was loud, but because he was the opposite of loud in a room full of noise. Ghanaian Canadian, born in Accra, raised in Brampton, built his own logistics company from the back of a rented van when he was 26. By 35, Mensah Cole Freight had 17 trucks, 2 warehouses, and contracts with 3 of the largest retail chains in Ontario. He didn't talk about money. He didn't wear it either. But it was there, quietly, solidly, the way he himself was. His mother, Mama Theodora, everyone called her Mama Teddy, had met Viveka twice, in 2 years of her son's engagement. Ezra, she told him one Sunday over Contamire stew and fried plantain at her house in Mississauga. That woman does not look at you. She looks at around you. You understand the difference, my son? Ezra had laughed. He told her Viveka was just private, just focused, just busy. She had her own career, her own world. Mama Teddy had pressed her lips together and said nothing more. But she reached over and covered his hand with hers, and he felt something in that gesture he didn't want to examine too closely. Viveka Strand was 34, Swedish-Nigerian, and everything that photographs well. Dia, she had met Ezra at a charity gala in downtown Toronto, 3 hours into an open bar, wearing a white dress that cost more than most people's rent. She was charming in the way that very beautiful people sometimes are, effortlessly, automatically, like breathing. She laughed at his jokes. She asked about his work with just enough interest to seem engaged. She touched his arm when she talked. By the end of the night, he had her number. By the end of the month, he had her at every event he attended. By the end of the year, he had her at his dinner table, his family gatherings, his early mornings, and late nights. By the end of the 2nd year, he had her ring on her finger. Mama Teddy had watched all of it. She had smiled when she needed to smile. She had welcomed Viveka into her home with rice and stew and a warm hand on the shoulder. But in private, to her sister on the phone, she had said something simple and devastating. I'm afraid my son has fallen in love with someone who has never actually seen him. Nobody listened. Nadia Sarpong had been cleaning Ezra's house for 3 years before Viveka came into the picture. She wasn't young in the way that gets you noticed. She was 31, compact, quietly pretty in a way that required you to actually pay attention, which most people didn't bother to do. She was from Kumasi originally, had come to Canada at 22 on a student visa, gotten her early childhood education diploma, and then watched the job market close every door she knocked on. No Canadian experience, no connections. Bills that didn't care about her circumstances. She had taken the cleaning work to survive, just temporarily, she told herself at first. 3 years later, she was still telling herself that. She cleaned for 4 households in the Oakville-Brampton corridor. Ezra's house was her Thursday. She would arrive at 8 in the morning, when he was already at the office, let herself in with the key he'd given her, work through the rooms methodically, leave everything in order, and be gone before he returned. For the first year, they barely exchanged more than a nod and a brief word. He was always leaving as she was arriving, or arriving as she was finishing. But small things accumulate. She had noticed, early on, that he drank his coffee and left the mug on the counter, always exactly 2 inches from the edge, always tilted slightly to the left. She noticed he kept a notepad by the kitchen window and wrote things on it in the morning and crossed them out at night. She noticed the framed photograph on his bookshelf, him and an older woman, both laughing, in front of what looked like a beach in West Africa, and that he'd dusted it himself, carefully, even though dusting was her job. One Thursday in November, she arrived to find him still home, sitting at the kitchen table with his coat on and his keys in his hand, not moving, just sitting. She hesitated at the door. "I can come back later," she said. He looked up. Something in his face was very far away. "No," he said. "Come in. He stopped. "My father passed last night in Accra." She stood there for a moment. She could have said, "I'm sorry for your loss," which is what you're supposed to say, what everyone says, the words that fill the space without touching anything real. Instead, she said, "Do you want me to make you something? You haven't eaten." She didn't know that for certain. She just knew it. The way you know things about people when you've been paying quiet attention for a long time. He looked at her, really looked at her, maybe for the first time. "Yes," he said. "Please." She made eggs. Nothing elaborate, just scrambled eggs with a little pepper and tomato. The way her own mother used to make them when something was wrong and words weren't enough. She set the plate in front of him and went to start in the other rooms, to give him space. 20 minutes later, she heard him rinse the plate in the sink. He left for the airport that afternoon. On the notepad by the window, he'd written, "Thank you, Nadia." That was all. But she read it 3 times before she turned it face down and went on with her work. Vivica did not go to Accra for the funeral. She had a retreat, she told Ezra, a work thing she couldn't move. She would be there when he got back, she said. She would be there to support him when he was home. Mama Teddy had watched Ezra travel alone to bury his father. She had held her grief and her anger together in her chest and not said a word about Vivica's absence. But at the burial, when Ezra's cousin Kweku had asked quietly where his fiancé was, Mama Teddy had said only, "She was busy." The word busy had sat between them like a stone. Ezra came back from Accra quieter than he'd left. He threw himself back into work. The wedding planning accelerated, venue deposits, catering contracts, guest lists, a dress-fitting Vivica described in detail over dinner, while Ezra nodded and ate. He told himself this was what moving forward felt like. He told himself grief made everything feel slightly unreal. He didn't examine the feeling that, of all the people in his life, the one who had fed him on the worst morning he could remember was a woman whose last name he'd had to look up on the invoice to remember. The accident happened on a Tuesday in March. Black ice on the 401, just past the Mississauga interchange. A transport truck lost traction and crossed into his lane. Ezra's car took the impact on the driver's side. He was airlifted to Sunnybrook Hospital in Toronto. The surgeons worked for 6 hours. When he woke up, he was intact. No paralysis, no internal bleeding, no damage that wouldn't heal. The body had survived, but his memory was not intact. The doctors explained it carefully to Mama Teddy, who sat at his bedside with her hands folded. Retrograde amnesia, partial and likely temporary. He remembered his childhood, his mother, his business in outline. He remembered Accra and Brampton and his father's face. He did not remember the last 2 years. He did not remember the engagement. He did not remember Vivica. Mama Teddy had sat very still while the doctor talked. Then she had asked, quietly, "Does he need to be told about everything at once?" The doctor said no, gently, over time. Let him rest. Let his brain find its own way back. Mama Teddy had nodded. She had taken her son's hand, and she had not called Vivica. Viveka found out from Ezra's assistant 3 hours after the accident. She arrived at the hospital at 7:45 in the evening. She had come from dinner, still in the dress, the heels, the full face of makeup. She walked to the nursing station and said she was the fiancé and needed to see him immediately. Mama Teddy met her in the hallway. "He's resting," Mama Teddy said. "I need to see him. He's resting, Viveka." "Mama Teddy." Her voice dropped. "I have rights here. I'm his fiancé. If there are decisions to be made, there are no decisions tonight," Mama Teddy said. "His doctors have everything in hand. He's stable. Go home and rest. Come tomorrow." Viveka had stood there in the fluorescent light, very still, her jaw tight. Then she'd said, "Has anyone called his lawyer? Because if there are power of attorney considerations..." Mama Teddy had looked at her for a long moment. "Go home, Viveka," she said. Viveka left. She did not come the next day. She called twice, briefly, to ask for updates. She texted the assistant, "Keep me posted on anything significant." She was at a client lunch, she said. She would come when things were clearer. On the third day, she arrived with a gift bag, wine and a candle, and a small card that said, "Thinking of you." She sat at his bedside for 20 minutes while Ezra looked at her with polite, searching confusion, trying to find something in her face that felt familiar. He could not. She was a stranger to him, a very composed, very beautiful stranger who kept touching his hand in a way that felt rehearsed. Before she left, in the hallway, she pulled Ezra's aunt aside and said quietly, "What happens with the business if he doesn't recover fully? Who has authority over the accounts?" The aunt had said nothing. She had simply looked at Viveka's hands, still holding the car keys, freshly manicured, and then looked at her face. And then she had walked away. Nadia heard about the accident from a neighbor of Ezra's, a woman named Mrs. Patterson, who knew Nadia cleaned the house and thought she should know. She heard it on a Wednesday afternoon, while she was at her second job of the day, a house in Oakville with 3 young children and a lot of laundry. She finished her shift. She took the bus home. She sat in her small apartment in Brampton for a long time, looking at her hands. She thought about scrambled eggs in November. She thought about a notepad that said, "Thank you." She didn't go to the hospital. She knew her place, or rather, she knew how the world worked, and she understood that a cleaning woman showing up at a hospital bedside for a man she barely knew would look a certain way, be understood a certain way. But on Thursday, her usual Thursday, she went to the house anyway. She let herself in. She didn't clean exactly. She just tended. She watered the plant by the kitchen window that was beginning to droop. She cleared the mail from the slot by the door. She made sure the heat was on. She left a container of jollof rice in the refrigerator with a note that said, "For when you're home, take care of yourself." She locked up and left. 3 days later, Ezra's aunt called the number on the cleaning invoice. "He's being discharged tomorrow," she said. "He can't be alone. Would you be willing to help, temporarily, with the house? He has a home care nurse coming, but would you be able to be there, just to help with things?" Nadia said yes. She was there when he came home. He walked in slowly, his aunt on one side, a nurse on the other, and stopped in the doorway of his own kitchen, like a man arriving somewhere he wasn't sure he'd been invited. He looked around at the counters, the window, the notepad. His eyes moved over everything carefully, the way you search a word you know, but can't find. Nadia was standing by the kitchen table. She didn't know what to do with her hands, so she just held them at her sides. "Hi," she said. "I'm Nadia. I've been looking after the house for you." He looked at her. There was nothing in his expression she could read. No recognition, no distance, just a kind of open quietness, like a door left ajar. "The plant looks good," he said. She didn't know why that made her eyes sting. She blinked it back. "It needed water," she said. He nodded. as if this was a perfectly sensible and complete conversation, and went to sit down. That was how it started. Over the weeks that followed, Nadia fell into a rhythm at the house that nobody had planned or formally arranged. She came every morning. She cooked, not elaborate things, just food that was warm and real, egusi soup and plain rice, and the fried plantain she'd learned her mother's way, slightly more caramelized than most people made it. She managed the house. She talked to the home care nurse. She answered the door for the steady stream of business associates and cousins and church friends who came to check on Ezra and left looking satisfied that he was being cared for. She was careful. Careful about the line between caring for someone and caring about someone. Careful about what she let herself feel. Careful about the way he sometimes looked at her across the kitchen table like she was something he was trying to remember from a dream. Ezra, for his part, was relearning himself. His doctors had said to expect a slow process. Fragments returning. Not all at once. Not in order. He would remember a meeting, and not the year it happened. He would recognize a voice on the phone, and not the face attached to it. He spent a lot of time quiet, not from depression, his doctors said, but from the sheer concentration required to be a person whose mind had been reshuffled. But with Nadia, he was not quiet in the same way. With her, the quiet was easy, comfortable in a way he couldn't explain. She didn't explain things to him. She didn't update him on things he should remember. She didn't look at him with that particular mix of concern and impatience that he'd noticed in some other visitors' faces. The look that said, "Come on, come back. We're waiting." She just existed alongside him, talked to him like he was already whole. One evening in April, he was sitting at the kitchen table looking at the notepad. He'd started writing things down again, habits returning before memories. He had written, "Call warehouse manager, Thursday delivery, check manifest, real things, work things." His brain finding its professional grooves even as the personal ones stayed blurry. Nadia was washing up by the sink. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure. How long have you been coming here?" Before all this, 3 years, she said. He turned that over. "Do you? Did we talk much? Before?" She considered the question honestly. "Not really, you were always busy." But once, she paused, hesitated. "Once you stayed home when you normally would have left, and I made you eggs." He was very still. "My father," he said, not a question. Yes, he was quiet for a long time. Outside, a car moved slowly past on the street, its headlights sweeping briefly across the kitchen ceiling. "I wrote you a note," he said. "Yes, I remember that," he said. "I don't know if I actually remember it or if I'm constructing it, but I can see the notepad and the word thank you, and I know it was for something that mattered." Nadia kept her eyes on the dish in her hands. "It was eggs," she said. "It wasn't much. Sometimes it doesn't need to be much," Ezra said. "Sometimes it just needs to be real." Now, let's talk about Viveka, because Viveka had not disappeared. She had simply redistributed her efforts. While Ezra was home recovering, Viveka had paid 3 visits in 6 weeks. She came dressed beautifully, brought things. A book, a bottle of something expensive, a subscription to a streaming service. She sat with him for an hour at a time and talked about things he couldn't contextualize. Their dinner at that restaurant in Yorkville, the weekend they'd planned in Quebec City, the wedding venue in Niagara they'd put a deposit on. She would say these things and then watch his face for the flicker of recognition. When it didn't come, something in her expression would tighten, almost imperceptibly, but Nadia, who was usually in the kitchen or the next room, noticed. She also noticed other things. Viveka asking Ezra's aunt during her second visit whether his doctors had given a timeline for full recovery. Viveka, on her third visit, stepping into the home office for 15 minutes while Ezra rested, and coming back out straightening her blazer, something slightly shifted in her composure. Viveka saying, in a low voice to someone on the phone in the front hallway, "I need to know where we stand legally. The wedding's in 4 weeks. If he can't, I need to know what my options are." Nadia heard that last one by accident. She had come downstairs quietly to get a glass of water and stopped on the 3rd step when she heard the voice. She stood there and let the words land. Then she went back upstairs without the water. She sat on the edge of the bed in the spare room where she'd been staying to help with morning routines, and she thought for a long time about what she had heard and what it meant, and what, if anything, it was her place to do about it. She thought about the woman's hands holding car keys on the night of the accident. She thought about 3 visits in 6 weeks. She thought about the home office and the straightened blazer. She thought about what Ezra had said. Sometimes it just needs to be real. It was Mama Teddy who found out first, and more specifically. She came by on a Saturday morning unannounced, the way she always did, with a pot of groundnut soup and opinions she wasn't planning to keep to herself. Nadia let her in, and they sat together in the kitchen for a few minutes while Ezra slept in. And something passed between the two women in the easiness of that conversation. The way they moved around each other without getting in the way. The way they both automatically lowered their voices when they heard him stir upstairs. That Mama Teddy noticed. "You care about my son," she said. It was not a question. Nadia looked at her directly. "I care about his well-being," she said carefully. "That's what I'm here for." Mama Teddy looked at her for a moment, then she said, "I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about you. What's in your chest when he walks into the room?" Nadia said nothing for a beat too long. Mama Teddy nodded. "That's what I thought." She wasn't unkind about it. She sipped her tea. "I'm also going to ask you something else, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Yes, Mama Teddy. Is there anything about that woman, Viveka, that I should know? That you've seen or heard?" Nadia looked at the table. She thought about the phone call. She thought about the home office. She told Mama Teddy exactly what she'd heard, and exactly what she'd seen, clearly and without embellishment, and then said, "I don't know what it means. I only know what I heard." Mama Teddy set down her tea. "That's enough," she said. Mama Teddy had a nephew who was a lawyer. She had another nephew who knew someone at the financial institution where Ezra held his business accounts. And Mama Teddy, quiet, warm, formidable Mama Teddy, who pressed her lips together and said nothing more, who covered hands with hers and held her grief and her anger together in her chest. Mama Teddy, when she decided to move, moved very quietly and very thoroughly. What she found over the course of 2 weeks was this. Viveka had, during Ezra's hospitalization, attempted to have herself named as emergency decision-maker for his financial accounts on the grounds of being his fiancé. The bank had requested documentation. She hadn't been able to produce it fast enough. Ezra's actual power of attorney, held by his aunt, had already been activated. She had also, according to Ezra's assistant, who turned out to have more loyalty to Ezra than Viveka had counted on, been in contact with a law firm specializing in estate and partnership law, asking preliminary questions about an engaged partner's rights in the event of incapacitation. And on the phone call Nadia had overheard, the options Viveka had been discussing with what turned out to be her best friend, a woman called Petra, had included, at Petra's cheerful suggestion, the possibility of proceeding with the wedding regardless of Ezra's memory, on the grounds that he wasn't legally incompetent, just confused. "He said I do a year ago," Viveka had apparently said. "He chose me when he was fully himself, so he can choose you again," Petra had said. "Just help him choose." Mama Teddy had sat with this information. For 3 days, she had prayed. She had called her sister. She had eaten jollof rice at Nadia's kitchen table. She always called it Nadia's kitchen now, without quite realizing she'd started doing that, and talked around the edges of the thing without discussing it directly. Then she had called Ezra's lawyer, and then she had called Ezra. If you think you know what happened next, stay with me, because this is where it surprised even me. Ezra's memory had been returning, not all at once, not in the dramatic movie way where someone says the magic word and everything floods back. It had come in pieces, some significant and some mundane. He remembered his first warehouse. He remembered a road trip to Montreal with his cousin. He remembered, one morning in late April, the name of the restaurant where he'd met Vivica, and the white dress, and the way she'd laughed at his joke. He lay in bed for a long time after that memory returned. He didn't tell anyone it had come back. He let the rest come in its own time, and as it did, he held it up against the weeks he'd just lived, against the hospital, the house, the kitchen, the woman who had made eggs in November and jollof rice in March, and who moved through his life as quietly and necessarily as light. He remembered eventually asking Vivica once, early in the relationship, testing something he hadn't named, what she would do if something happened to him. If the business failed or he got sick or things changed. She had laughed and kissed him and said, "Nothing's going to happen to you, babe." It was not an answer. He had known even then it was not an answer. He had decided not to notice. He noticed now. Ezra called a meeting. That is perhaps too formal a word for it. He simply asked people to come. Mama, Teddy, his aunt, his lawyer, Vivica. He asked Nadia to be there too, and when she hesitated, he said, "Please, I'd like you to be there." So she stayed. They gathered in his living room on a Sunday afternoon in May. The light was coming in sideways from the west, the way it does in spring, and everything looked more ordinary and more significant than it had any right to look. Ezra sat in the chair by the window. He was not the man who had come home from the hospital 8 weeks ago. You could see that just looking at him. He was present again, settled in himself, the particular stillness that had always been his most distinctive quality, restored to something sure and chosen rather than lost. He looked at Vivica. She had dressed carefully. Hair done, blazer, heels, even though it was a Sunday afternoon at a house. She sat with her hands in her lap and her face arranged into the expression she used when she was managing something. "I've been thinking," Ezra said, "about what I remembered and what I didn't, and what that meant." Vivica said, "Ezra, let me finish," he said, not unkindly. "I know I didn't remember you. I know that was painful. But I want to be honest with you and honest with myself, which I think I wasn't fully being before the accident." He paused. "I've also learned some things these past few weeks about what was done while I was in the hospital, about certain inquiries and certain conversations." The lawyer set a folder on the coffee table. Nothing dramatic. Just a folder. Vivica looked at it. Her composure shifted, slightly, carefully, like ice moving under weight it has been holding for too long. "I want to be fair," Ezra said. "I think you fell into something you didn't plan for. I think the situation scared you. But I also think the things you did and the things you said told me something true that I had been choosing not to see." He met her eyes. "My mother asked me once, long before any of this, whether you were kind. Not successful, not beautiful. Kind. I said you were. I think I was wrong, and I think part of me knew that. And I think the accident, as terrible as it was, gave me back something I'd been letting myself lose. The ability to tell the difference." The room was very quiet. Vivica looked, for one moment, like she might say something real. Something underneath all the management and arrangement and careful construction of herself. Her face shifted, and then it closed again. She stood up. She picked up her bag. She looked at Nadia once, with an expression that was not quite contempt, and not quite acknowledgement, but something between the two. Then she walked out. The door didn't slam. It closed with a soft, precise click, like a clasp fastened. There is no storybook scene after this. No proposal in the kitchen, no dramatic declaration. Life is not usually a drama. It is, mostly, a series of ordinary mornings that accumulate into something that looks, from far enough away, like a shape. What I can tell you is this Randia Sarpong did not go back to cleaning Ezra's house. Not because something changed dramatically overnight, but because things shifted gradually in the way real things shift. Without announcement, without fanfare. She went back to school that fall, enrolled in a graduate program in early childhood education at York University. Ezra, when she told him, said, "That's been waiting for you for a long time." She didn't ask what he meant. She understood what he meant. Mama Teddy, who had never been confused about any of it, invited Nadia for Sunday soup by the third week after Vivica left, and never thought to explain why, and Nadia never thought to ask. And Ezra, who had once been a man who couldn't tell the difference between someone who loved him and someone who loved what he had, who had needed an accident and a period of amnesia and 8 weeks of being tended to by a quiet woman who showed up on Thursdays. Ezra sat at his kitchen table one ordinary Thursday morning in November. A full year after the first November, a cup of coffee 2 inches from the edge of the counter, slightly tilted to the left, and watched Nadia come through the door, not with a mop and a cleaning caddy, but with 2 bags of groceries, and a story about something funny that had happened on the subway, and felt something in his chest settle completely, like a door gently and finally closing. Not a door closing on possibility. A door closing on the gap between where you are and where you belong. If this story moved you, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been in a moment of real difficulty, real, bone-deep difficulty, and discovered that the person who showed up wasn't the person you expected? That the ones who count your blessings and the ones who count your tears are rarely the same people? Leave your thoughts below. This community is built on stories like this one, and if you're new here, welcome. Subscribe. There are more stories where this one came from, and every single one of them is worth your time. Take care of yourselves, and pay attention to who shows up when the lights go down.